Greetings to all our Porsche friends. I wish it were possible for each of you to come to Stuttgart to see for yourselves how our car is made in the Porsche works. Instead of this, perhaps we can bring to you with this film the picture and the story of the Porsche idea. Here at Zuffenhausen we have continued and developed the Porsche automotive ideas originally conceived by my father, Professor Ferdinand Porsche. And we constantly strive to build each Porsche car with the same craftsmanship, perfection, integrity that has brought worldwide recognition for these engineering achievements. I hope you will enjoy this little visit to our plant, and I want to wish each of you many happy hours of Porsche driving.
Although Porsche and Reuter are two separate companies, they have long been associated both as neighbors and in the manufacture of the Porsche car. The association began in the early 30s when old Professor Porsche was concerned with the design of a streamlined car, and later with the development of the Volkswagen. When after World War II, Professor Porsche and his son were planning manufacture of the newly designed Porsche car and could not use their own factory, it was then that Porsche and Reuter found themselves under one roof and in one building. Their common goal, the production of a unique vehicle tailored to order by a body maker with more than 50 years of experience. So here in the receiving department at Reuter, the production of the Porsche car actually begins. Today, practically the entire capacity of Reuter Zuffenhausen is devoted to production of the Porsche car body. It is difficult to imagine that these flat pieces of sheet steel will be transformed into the beautiful shape of the Porsche car. The process begins by cutting the sheet steel into the patterns of the many pieces to be assembled. The electric shears cut through this tough steel like a knife through butter. This is one of the large presses that stamp and form the body pieces. It is not fully automated and requires 2 men for operation. They work skillfully together in complete coordination with the machine. The particular piece being formed here is the front lid or deck. The dies for stamping this piece can be removed and others for shaping different pieces substituted. Reuter fabricates their own dies for stamping. The press is only one of the many required to stamp out the shapes needed. Some of the presses are smaller and form only one special shape. This load of front decks represents about a week's supply. Another run will be made when the stock needs to be refilled. Welding plays a major part in fabricating the unitized Porsche body. More than 500 separate pieces are used to form the light but strong mono-unit. Acetylene welding, spot and arc welding are needed to unite the pieces into the finished product. Parts are first welded into small components. These are then combined into larger assemblies. This larger piece, the bottom pan or frame, is placed in a jig to conform to rigid specifications. After it is securely in position, the tunnel is added and welded to it. The tunnel has been separately welded together of smaller pieces. Here in a larger jig, the frame begins to assume final shape. The front and rear sections have been separately assembled and are joined in this jig. Now the bottom pan and tunnel are added and are securely clamped into place. The unit frame is now becoming a strong, rigid, complete assembly. The finishing touches are made on this jig. Here, the frame is given a number, and for the first time, assumes an identity that it will retain for the rest of its days. Dimensions are checked out here, especially the distance between door hinges. Final welding operations are done. All rough edges are filed and smooth. In this jig, additional tolerance checks are made for alignment of torsion bar and front axle holes. At this station, every seam and weld is completely sealed with a special rubber hardening compound to ensure against leakage or rusting. In these jigs, the finished frame units are assembled to the body parts. The coupe or cabriolet parts are clamped and bolted into the heavy jig and welded to the box frame to complete the famous unitized Porsche car body. Here in this section, the hundreds of body shells get the final hand operations that make the Reuter body a custom job. The tools used here are the file, hammer, and chisel, with plenty of muscle power. Each body is carefully and painstakingly smoothed and finished to perfection. Each door is filed and sanded to fit the individual body. Final parts are added and welded. There is no mechanization here, only the meticulous handwork of the carefully trained German craftsmen. After inspection and acceptance, the body shell then moves into the paint shop. Here, the first step is application of undercoating. Each body is undercoated with 25 pounds of coating for weather, sound, and rust proofing. The undercoating is carefully sprayed on for complete coverage. The shell is specially prepared for the priming coat with an acid wash. A final check is made for rough spots or imperfections in the finish. In the spray booth, note that the front and rear decks, the doors and bumpers are kept with the body to which they have been custom fitted. The primer paint is carefully applied to all parts. The primer is then thoroughly baked on in this oven. Before the final 2 coats of lacquer are applied, each body is again carefully inspected, smoothed and sanded wet. Even the smallest imperfection in the finish is noted and meticulously worked over. Two coats of lacquer are applied to give the beautiful Porsche car finish. Here the body goes in to get the final coat. Note that the doors, bumpers, and decks are still with the body and are sprayed simultaneously so that there will be no color variations. Looking very much like the proverbial elves, these 2 craftsmen are artists in the application of the final coat of lacquer. The spray booth is dust-free, and the elves wear special masks for protection. After baking between each coat of lacquer, the body moves into the final Reuter assembly lines. Here, the body is fitted and completed. Upholstery is installed, metal and rubber strips inserted, lights, wiring harness, glass and hardware attached. Here the doors, with frame and glass, are being carefully fitted. In this section, the bumpers, marked to match the car to which they belong, are fitted with overriders and rubber strips. The installation of the bumper to the car takes but a few minutes. This specialist has installed windshields for some 8 years, so he knows exactly how hard to hit the glass without breaking it. The rubber and metal frame is already attached to the glass. The rubber is formed to the exact profile of the metal frame, so that when the cord is pulled out, the rubber slips snugly and securely into the profile of the metal body frame. Each cabriolet top or hard top is custom made and fitted to the individual body. This section is devoted to the skilled craftsmanship needed for this operation. The finished body shell goes to the Porsche plant on the special flatbed truck. It is transferred to a dolly and goes into the end of the Porsche assembly line. Because of the tremendous demand for the Porsche car, the firm of Draughts has been retained to produce the Porsche Roadster bodies. Processing is similar to that at Reuter. And here, the finished bodies are coming off the Draughts' final assembly line. The Roadster bodies are side-loaded onto these tandem trucks and transported to the Porsche plant. The spirit and ideals of Professor Porsche lives on today with his contemporaries who are still with the firm. Under their guidance, a group of younger engineers follow the same pattern for originality and integrity that is the heritage of the Porsche name. Until recently, assemblies were furnished by suppliers. Now, however, the major part of all critical machining and tooling is accomplished in the modern machine shop of Porsche Plant Number 2. This three-way drill is typical of the fine equipment used in tooling the Porsche components. Here, the crankcase is being drilled three ways simultaneously. This glamorous operation shows the tooling of the connecting rods. The machine tools four sides of the rod castings at once. Quality control is a major factor in the Porsche operation. The highest quality requires that testings be made by piece rather than by samplings. Here, each and every connecting rod is carefully checked out against specifications. Special gauges ensure accurate inspection of tolerances. The Porsche finned brake drums are tooled on these special machines. Again, inspection of each part is carefully controlled. Each crankcase undergoes critical inspection and a careful check against specifications and tolerances. This rotary multiple drill is drilling cylinder heads for the Super 90 engine. This interesting machine inserts the valve sleeves in the preheated cylinder heads. First for the exhaust valves, then for the intake valves. Each cylinder head is measured for volume content of the combustion chamber so that the two heads in the engine can be perfectly matched and balanced. Conditions are duplicated here with petrol being used for the measuring liquid. The exact volume in cubic centimeters is stamped on each head. This worker, who has been with Porsche for 7 years, makes the final inspection of the cylinder heads against specifications. Another critical inspection takes place here with the camshafts being checked out. Before going into the final assembly lines, crankcases and transmission cases are steam cleaned in this special bath. In the German tradition of craftsmanship, Porsche maintains its apprentice school. These young boys are trained in the simple and basic use of tools and will gradually work into the line as helpers and then as qualified workers. This is the small but famous Porsche assembly line. In the center are 2 rows of cars, the final line. On the right, the engine assembly lines, and on the left, the transmission assembly line. This operation in the engine sub-assembly line shows the balancing of the crankshaft with flywheel. Note again that each one is marked for identification to be later matched together. Installing the connecting rods to the crankshaft is carefully performed here. Note that each nut is tightened with a torque wrench and tolerances carefully checked. If you drive a Porsche, it's quite certain that the valves and springs were inserted in the engine by these deft hands. Now the rocker arm covers are put on and the clamps tightened. The famous Porsche air cooling fan, or blower, is now attached to the generator. Note again the use of the torque wrench. The main engine assembly line consists of 11 to 12 stations, with each worker performing his specialized job as the engines go down the line. It takes about 15 minutes for the engine to go through each station. From the end of the line, the completed engine, here is a Super 90, is taken directly to the test room to be run in. This is the special area where each engine is tested and receives its horsepower rating according to specifications. There are facilities here to run in 4 engines at once. This Super 90 engine has just come off the assembly line and will have its first run-in. Now it starts up. The dials on the left show oil temperature and pressure. Now you can see the RPMs. The big dial does not indicate horsepower, but gives a figure from which the engine will be rated. Now the RPMs begin to climb. Adjustments are made on the dial on this engine. Back in the assembly room, the engine is adjusted according to its record card. Final shrouding piece is installed, and it is ready then for installation in a car body. This sub-assembly of the brake unit shows the shoes installed, adjusted, and other parts fitted to prepare the component. The transmission sub-assembly line is comparatively quiet. The care with which the famous Porsche Synchromesh transmission is assembled requires slow and accurate assembly of the parts. These hands are sure and certain, as each gear, spacer, and critical part takes its place in the finished assembly. Here, the synchromesh assembly and drive shaft with gears are assembled to the back plate. After inspection, the whole unit will be ready for final assembly to the case. The transmission and rear end assembly line is shorter than the engine assembly line. After installation of units in the transmission case, assembly proceeds with installation of the rear axle assembly and housings, attachment of lines, starter motor, spindle and brake assemblies, and finally the brake drums. Here in the final assembly line, the cars move on dollies in 2 lines. At each station, final installations are made. Steering wheel, wiring harness, instruments, gas tank, battery, all accessories, and running gear. Here, the torsion bars, trailing arms, and shock absorbers are going in. The operation at each station takes about 17 minutes, and then each car. Installation of the transmission and rear end assembly is a 3-man job. This team works together and makes the job look pretty easy. After doing this 30 times a day, probably a cushion for that knee would be in order. Installation of the engine is much simpler and takes but a few minutes. Each wheel on every Porsche car is balanced with tires before delivery. Here, the headlights are being focused and adjusted. On this special machine, the final and last adjustments are made before the car leaves the assembly line. All wheels are carefully checked here for correct camber, caster, and toe-in. On this machine, actual road driving conditions are duplicated with the elimination of road noises and vibrations. The car is driven under load through the gears and performance noted and checked. A series of mirrors permits the driver to make a check of all lights before leaving the machine. Adjustments are made immediately to carburetors and engine from the notating out for the actual road test. These protective pants are put on the car, and special plates are attached. Porsche cars being road tested are a familiar sight every day on the Autobahn between Zuffenhausen and Heilbronn. After road testing, the car is returned to the Reuter plant and undergoes a severe water and leak test. The driver checks for leaks as the car is deluged with water. The underside must be leak-proof too. In this finishing room, the car is rubbed, polished, and the smallest imperfections corrected. Instruments and accessories are checked, and after final OK, the Reuter seal is attached, and the car is turned over to Porsche. Here in the ready or overseas shipment, this group of cars will be loaded on trucks and taken overland to a German seaport. It takes some skillful driving to get them all aboard. Finally, they're all off for Hamburg. As each working day draws to an end, the busy factory yard is cleared of cars for the next day's work. At 5 o'clock, awaiting the touch of the workers' hands to bring them back to the life given them by Professor...